Hello, and welcome to Chagpar MD. I'm Dr. Anise Chagpar, and today I have a very special guest. Dr. Joan Cook is an associate professor of psychiatry at Yale School of Medicine. Now, many of you have asked me to do a video about PTSD. We're going through unusual times, to say the least, with the COVID pandemic. And there are some of you who may have lost a loved one with this disease. You may have lost an income. And some of you also have life that happens to be going on at the same time. And so maybe facing other things like cancer or other things during this pandemic. And at the end of the day, it often feels, and some of you have said this to me, that it feels like post-traumatic stress disorder. Well, I happen to know Joan Cook, who is a national, if not international, expert on this phenomenon. So I thought it would be really cool to tap into her expertise today to learn a little bit more about PTSD and how all of the current phenomena are affecting us. So thank you so much for joining me today, Joan. It's great to have you here.
It's great to have you. One thing you didn't mention is that we're friends.
We are friends. We are friends. We've known each other for a while. We were together in a Public Voices fellowship, which was all about trying to get the word out through various means about what we do in medicine and hot topics. Now, Joan has written more op-eds and more news stories than I can possibly count. And I will leave you a link in the description box below for some of her latest work. But Joan, I thought maybe we could start off with a definition. Like, what exactly is PTSD? We use the term a lot, we throw it around, but what exactly is it?
Okay. So PTSD has been around for a long time. It's been known by a number of different labels like shell shock, war neurosis, combat fatigue. But when we really put it on the map in our psychiatric classification system was in 1980. And two forces really came together to make that happen. One was the women's movement, sort of identifying sort of domestic violence, which can cause, interpersonal violence, which can cause PTSD. And the other was the Vietnam veterans who came back from war and were told, like previous generations of soldiers, suck it up, espouse the John Wayne mentality. And those two forces really came together to say, we are in pain. This is not okay. This is not about our childhood histories or our personality. This is about events that we have experienced that have really devastated our lives. So the definition of what meets criteria for traumatic event has changed over time. Essentially, the traumas that pack the biggest wallop are those that we experience firsthand. So you can witness something or experience it indirectly, but typically it's the ones that you experience firsthand that really pack the biggest wallop. So combat, rape, natural disasters, man-made disasters, and the who goes on to develop PTSD is related to a number of things. One of the biggest predictors is the dose and duration of the trauma. So the bigger the dose, the longer the duration, the more probable it is that you will develop subsequent mental health symptoms, including PTSD. I think what's happening, some of what's happening in this country, I think frontline providers, people who are in the trenches, helping people with COVID, people who have lost a loved one, absolutely they may have be experiencing PTSD because of COVID. I think too, people who have already been traumatized, cancer survivors, combat veterans, childhood abuse survivors, can also have a re-exacerbation because it's triggering for them, the hopelessness and the helplessness. I think for a lot of people though, and this I think can help with our coping strategies, let's face it, COVID sucks. I mean, it just absolutely stinks all the way around.
Yeah.
It stinks for parents having to homeschool kids. It stinks for frontline providers who have to go in even though they're scared and afraid they're going to bring it home. It stinks for, everybody shelving, stocking shelves at the grocery store, etc. It stinks. And so I think if we, and I'm not minimizing that it stinks. It absolutely stinks. But I think if we can frame it sort of more as a major life event for those of us like myself, who's not directly on the front lines, like you likely are in the hospital, I think it helps us to develop better coping strategies. Tell me if I'm talking too much.
No, this is good.
Okay. So I feel like there's a famous, I don't know much about Shakespeare, but there's a famous quote that Shakespeare said that really motivates me, and I teach it to all the patients that I work with. And it's, beware of the stories you tell yourself, for surely you will be lived by them. And so if we tell ourselves that COVID is, never going to end, we're absolutely hopeless and helpless in the face of it, we are going to likely not engage in coping strategies that will help us deal with the pandemic, right? If we see it as, and I'm again saying sucks in bold, underline, exclamation points, absolutely awful. But if we tell ourselves this is something that absolutely stinks and it negatively impacts my life, and I'm angry and I'm sad and I'm whatever, but I can overcome this. I can wear a mask. I can socially distance. And if we tell ourselves this too shall pass. Now, it may not pass in 2020. It may be 2021, 2022. This will pass and we will go back to living a good life. And we can still live aspects of a good life even in the face of a pandemic. I'm thinking about, we have to socially distance, but that doesn't mean we don't need to be connected to one another. And and Zoom isn't the same, and we can't get a hug and a bit, but we can still be connected. And so I think those are strategies that we need to say to ourselves, and stories we need to tell ourselves that are more realistic and hopeful. And I think one of the things about dealing with a major life event or pandemic or major traumatic event is about taking back our power. And I teach that with the combat veterans that I work with now, or the rape survivors, or before I was at Yale, I was at Columbia, where I'd work with people who would escape the towers. And I think one of those things is trauma takes away our power. It takes away power and control. And how do we, in small ways, take back our power and feel less helpless?
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there, Joan. So
yeah.
A couple of things, right? So I think that we totally get it. COVID sucks, cancer sucks, racism sucks, but it just seems like there's so much that sucks that's going on all right now. And when you talked about how the whole concept of PTSD kind of started with the women's movement and Vietnam, one of the things that struck me is that, right now there could also be other things that exacerbate it. So, with COVID, we're all stuck at home, and some people who are in relationships where there is domestic violence, we're now beginning to see that that's on the rise, and you don't really have the capacity to leave, right? Where are you gonna go? And so this sense of helplessness kind of just is exacerbated, on top of which you've got kids that you need to homeschool. You might have just lost your job or been furloughed because the restaurant that you were working at is now closed. And we're not getting the extra $600 that we were getting in unemployment, and on and on and on and on. So how do you kind of take back that power? it can't just be, well, have a more optimistic attitude and a
Yeah,
stiff
yeah,
upper
yeah, for
lip.
sure, for sure. No, I think it's multi sort of determined, and to be fair to ourselves, as you said, COVID has impacted so many things. You know, occupational, social, parenting, relationships, everything. I think there are some strategies that we could use to take good care of ourselves so that as we're coping, we're in a better place. And that is trying to maintain good sleep schedule. And I can share with you so that you can share with your viewers a whole bunch of free evidence-based resources, pamphlets, apps, etc., all evidence-based. So, you know, making sure that we're getting adequate sleep, trying to go to sleep at the same time, wake up at the same time in the morning. Unfortunately, a lot of people, as they want to cope with difficult things, they'll reach for a little alcohol. And in the long run, you know, that might help you get to sleep the first night, or, you know, calm your nerves a little, but in the long run, then you have not only one problem, but you've got two. So we really have to watch our intake of alcohol, and really keep that at a minimum. I think we need to still engage, and I know this is incredibly hard, in some kind of exercise routine, whether it's in our own small little apartments and watching a yoga video online, or but we need to make sure that that happens. Getting out and getting fresh air, connecting with other people. One of the biggest predictors of who gets PTSD is not just the wallop that the PTSD packs, but is social support. And social support means so much, not just to mental health, but to good life functioning. So we need to make sure we get that as well. So I think there are things that we need to make sure are in place for ourselves, and also strategies, unsafe strategies, we have to make sure not to use.
Yeah, I think that's so critical. I mean, even though it's just that basic tenets of, you know, make sure that you're taking care of yourself, right? You're eating healthfully, you're exercising, you're getting enough sleep, you're staying socially connected. You know, you're trying to be present as much as you can in the moment so that you can really take stock of what's going on in your life, so that you can make your life better. Do you have advice for people who may be struggling with relationships or domestic violence right now in COVID, where they may know that they're in trouble?
Yeah, that's a hard one, finding a place to go and a place to turn, and I can certainly share with your resources. I think what I'd like all people to know, not just domestic violence survivors, but all people, is to know that they are not alone, that there is help and healing possible. And I think, you know, sometimes when we do fall down in our own coping, or when these life events sort of hit us and we have a hard time mobilizing our internal resources or finding those external resources, we tell ourselves that we stink, or that we're lazy, or that we're crazy, or that we're bad, or that we could do more. And I've been helping people through Yale's COVID professional support system, and finding that a lot of frontline survivors, healthcare providers, are really beating themselves up that they're not, quote unquote, coping better. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one thing that we need to do, is to have more compassion for ourselves, because right, we've never been faced with something like this. And all of the hassles and the stressful events that come along with COVID are huge. And we're still, you know, new in this. Eight sort of months, we're still getting our sort of sea legs. So to be compassionate with ourselves, to tell ourselves that we're doing the very best we can. And what I say to the clients that I work with is, fall down 7 times, get up 8. Right. So, you know, or I also say, you know, feel the feeling, but choose the behavior. So you fall down, it's like, you know, clear off your knee, put some antiseptic, blow on it, give it a kiss, let your spouse give it a kiss, your kid, whatever, and get up again, and choose a healthy behavior. Don't choose to turn to alcohol or drugs. Don't excessively watch your Twitter feed or your news feed, which bring in a lot of drama and chaos. I'm not telling people don't be informed. We absolutely need to be. informed, particularly in today's day and age. We need to be a good citizenry, but take it in doses. 2 times a day, 15 minutes. And if live feeds jack us up, read it in print. So to know they're not alone, to know we're all going to get through this together, to know that there is help out there. You can empower yourself by all of these different resources. And if that doesn't work, there are people like me and you out there who do telemental health, telehealth, and certainly in-person healthcare as well.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's kind of happened all at the same time, and when you were talking about, witnessing events, I mean, the biggest wallop is the events that happen to you personally. And certainly, we've all had people who we know or others who have lost a loved one during this pandemic. And I think that that's one of the biggest wallops that you can
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then on top of it, family can't go to the funeral because there's limited capacity. And so are there ways to kind of deal with that? And I think the same thing goes with cancer survivors too. Getting a cancer diagnosis is bad enough, but then getting a cancer diagnosis and being told, well, we need to do your visits through a computer screen. We may need to delay your surgery a little bit. You're taking chemotherapy. This is going to put you at increased risk of getting this virus that's going around. Like, for a lot of people, I can just imagine them going, enough already. Like, life is bad enough, and then this.
Yeah. So I don't think there's, and it's not just, I don't think, research shows, other clinicians show, there's not one great way to cope. There's multi ways, and there's not one path, but little decisions that we make along the way. And I think as we get frustrated, as we get disappointed, to feel those feelings and then choose the safer behavior. So this really stinks. I am really upset about this. Whether you need to cry, whether you need to, take a mental health day and stay at home that day, etc., and then come back the next day and say, I'm gonna choose to do this differently. Yeah. I wish there were ways as healthcare providers, as loving, big-hearted people like you and I are, that we could help and take care of more people in doing that. But I think ultimately how we empower people is by teaching them how to take care of themselves. So I think of this analogy, and this is how I think of the clinical work that I do, is, when someone is out in the ocean and they're having a hard time sort of swimming, I can certainly swim out there, put them on my back and carry them in. And I can do that in an emergency, and so could you. But I think how we help the world better is that we go out in our rowboat and we're right next to them, and we tell them how to take a hand over hand and to flip over on their back and to tread water, and we teach them each step of the way and follow them in the path to get them to shore. Because the next time they're out there, and we might not be available on 24/7 call, they can get themselves, they can remember what we've taught them. And I think that's the job of a good healthcare provider, that's the good job of a parent, that's the good job of a citizen and neighbor with one another, is that we get out there in the boat and we help each other get to shore. And I hope is, if one thing that COVID has sort of taught us is the collective, and the George Floyd, which is heartbreaking and unbelievably, makes me want to rage, is that I take that rage and I power it to change it for the collective, when we use that collective to row us all to shore, to better equity and equality in this country.
Yeah, I was going to go right to that point. So you kind of read my mind, which was, there are things that happen directly to us, and then there are things that we see happening to others.
Yes.
And so the George Floyds, the Breonna Taylors, the, you know, and it's not like this hasn't been happening for a long time, but I think that now particularly, like seeing it, and being, I don't know about everybody else, but I feel kind of a heightened sense of sensitivity more recently, where things, you know, you really take notice, and that concept of taking that power back and
Yes.
saying we need to make positive changes. It's,
Yes.
you know, it's beyond rioting in the streets. It's how do we take positive changes?
Absolutely. For ourselves, for our community, for not just this country, but for the world.
Right.
And what is it, the world that we want to live on, that we judge ourselves and others for falling down in the face of COVID? Or do we say, you know, let's be more powerful and choose a different way forward?
Yeah.
And I think, you know, for some of the people that I've been talking to is, you know, judging themselves for not coping well is like a second insult.
Exactly.
And it's like, right, we don't need to do that to ourselves. This is hard. And to say to ourselves, this is hard, and I'm going to look for better resources, and I'm going to empower myself and get on COVID Coach app on a daily basis to monitor my mood, monitor my exercise, monitor my alcohol take. And it sounds silly for sure, but just monitoring those things for ourselves, keeping a record and really writing it down, whether it's in the app or on paper on our computer, helps us to be more conscientious of it and aware. So monitoring, even in and of itself, our coping strategies can help us be more aware of them throughout the day, to when we choose that pivot point. Do I take alcohol, or do I go read a good book? Do I, you know, engage in unsafe coping strategy and go yell at my partner and my kids, or do I go for a run? So monitoring that helps us when we get to that choice point to choose a better path.
Yeah, so important. And hopefully, as you say, through this whole pandemic, hopefully we actually emerge better, right? Because hopefully we can learn all of those strategies, whether we call it resilience or mindfulness or coping or making a better you. Hopefully through this, you know, somebody in that rowboat will be there to say, you know what, here's how you can do this, so that the next crisis, because there will be another crisis.
Yeah.
It may not be a global pandemic, but there will be another crisis, because that's life. Maybe we'll be better able to deal with it. Joan, this has been so fantastic. Thank you so much for being my guest here today on CHAGPAR MD. And thank you for all of the resources. I will leave them in the description box below. I hope all of you found this as informative and enlightening as I did. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, leave us a comment in the description box below in the comments, and we will respond. Until next week, I'm Dr. Anise CHAGPAR, wishing you all a safe and healthy week.